You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, David.
Hello, Will.
And hello, listeners. Welcome to episode 229 of the Common Descent Podcast, where we discuss fossil, evolutionary, and earth science topics. Today, we're talking about Myrmecophagy, or in simpler terms, ant eating.
Eating of ants.
This is another diet episode where we will be looking at the behavior of ant eating ants as often for many organisms a main source of their diet.
Right, not just eating a few ants, but mostly eating ants.
We'll go through some of the major groups that do this, the adaptations they share to be efficient ant eaters, as well as what evidence there is in the fossil record of the evolution of some of these groups and other ant-eating members, and just take a look at how extremely common it is for animals to decide, oh, I think I'll just eat ants.
Also, we'll spend some extra time on anteaters, the animals that are called anteaters.
Exactly, because we kind of can't skip over them to any degree in this episode that is their namesake.
Xenarthran fans rejoice.
We are discussing this partially because I was inspired by that news we did a few episodes ago, but also because we got a bunch of requests for ant eating and ant eaters from Big Boss Man, Piero, Z, Kristen, Hannah, Teoranosaurus, and Carolina and Barbara. Thank you all for the requests. Hope you enjoy the episode. Before we get into the main topic and before we get into the news, some quick announcements. As always, we have a Patreon, and that Patreon funds the podcast top to bottom. It lets us do all the cool things that we get to do. And if you sign up to support us there, you can also get extra goodies, extra content from us, bonus episodes, bonus news, gifts and goodies, and your name shouted out if you sign up at certain levels here on the podcast. Today, we would like to welcome two of our newest patrons, Rebecca and Diane.
Thank you both for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. Dear listeners, if you are not a patron and you are interested and capable of doing so, we invite you to check it out. There's a really fun community of our listeners on Patreon. They join us for live streams. They're in the comments. We do bonus content, all sorts of fun stuff.
Yes. Speaking of being part of a fun community and the cool stuff we get to do because of Patreon, we recently had our latest museum meetup because of all of your support.
We went to the Fern Bank in Atlanta, hung out with about a dozen of our fans, and it was a super fun time.
It was so nice. It was so fun. It just delightful all the way around.
We also presented at the Athens Science Cafe that same weekend, which was put on by a bunch of local students, and we interacted with a bunch of people down there from the Coalition of Athens Scientists. Very cool people. If you're in the area, check them out. We had a lot of fun.
It was great. Just a lot of fun and very welcoming. Would do again. Also, speaking of our wonderful fans, we got some fun mail. We got another Halloween postcard from Yayawi Neko that has some chubby kittens making Halloween decorations, and it's very cute.
Thank you so much, Yayoi Neko. And also, in response to the thing you wrote on the card, David Steen wrote a book a few years ago called Secrets of Snakes. I have not read it, but David Steen is a pretty cool science communicator, and if you haven't read it before, check it out.
As for the rest of our announcements, we have some upcoming and recent things. Spooky is now all out for the spooky parts of the episodes, which now means we have Cutie coming up and the live stream shortly after.
It's been a great year of Spooky. So much engagement from the fans. So much awesome fan art. Thank you all so much.
It's so cool. Check out the site as those get posted. You can see them there and join the Discord if you want to be part of the conversations and releases as they happen. Also, we're getting toward the end of the year, which means our end of the year Q&A is coming up, which means the questionnaire will be going up on November 1st. So check out links and the site for that if you want to submit a question for our end of the year Q&A.
The form will be open all throughout November, and then we will release that episode at the end of December. So you'll have about a month to submit your question, and then we will answer it in a big question answering extravaganza at the end of the year.
And speaking of special end of the year episodes, Leave It to Us has their mailbag episode coming out in November.
That'll be out in the first week of November. So that will also be a fun Q&A. It won't be anywhere near as long as our preposterously gigantic Q&As, but hey, Leave It to Us is still new, so there's time for growth in the future.
Yep. Be careful what you ask for. And with that, we will wrap up announcements and move to our first official section, which is our news section. Every episode, we like to gather up some recent science news in the categories of evolution and paleontology so that we can all stay up to date with current research. David, what's your first news?
My first bit of news is about trace fossils. We have talked about trace fossils a whole bunch on the podcast. We did a focus of them back in episode 118. We've talked about footprints and burrows and swimming traces and hopping traces. This news presents what might be the first known case of a fossilized butt drag. This is research published in the journal Ichnos by Charles Helm et al., and we'll link in the blog post to an article on the conversation written by two of the authors, Charles Helm and Lynn Quick. The trace fossils described in this paper belong to a rock hyrax. Rock hyraxes are small-ish mammals that today live in Africa and in the Middle East. They do a bunch of stuff that leaves behind traces. They live in burrows, they walk around. They also form middens. This is similar to pack rats, where they are using their own bodily secretions to form sort of a little structure that cements together, which for paleontologists can be a really important source of ecological information. So there's a lot of rock hyrax trace fossil potential, but not a lot actually written about them or studied about them. This paper, one of the goals stated of this paper is to review the potential for rock hyrax trace fossils and to describe a few newly discovered ones. The newly discovered ichnofossils were found within Walker Bay Nature Reserve on South Africa's Cape South coast. There are two instances of trace fossils described here. The first are in rocks about 76,000 years old, so the very end of the Ice Age. There are 4 depressions in the sand, in the sediment, that appear to be tracks. The paper actually describes the shape of them as resembling those of a miniature hominin. So they look almost like tiny people tracks. Each track is about 5 to 7 centimeters long, and the shape and size of them, the authors suggest, is consistent with rock hyrax, if a little bit on the big side. So it might have been a slightly larger rock hyrax than we're used to today.
Neat.
There are some alternative options. It could be rabbits, it could be small primates, but they suspect that it is a rock hyrax. If it is, it would be the first known record of rock hyrax footprint fossils. Interestingly, the tracks, there's 4 footprints, and they appear to show a walking gait, right? One foot after the other, which is unusual because modern hyrax is bound.
Yeah.
We talked about bounding in episode 193. That's how rabbits move. So either this was a walking hyrax, which would be interesting, or one of the tracks might not actually be a track, because they describe in the paper the other 3 tracks do fit a bounding pattern. So the 4th one could be an unrelated feature, and the other 3 are actually the footprints.
Oh.
So it's a little bit unclear, but they appear to be potentially the first known record of hyrax footprints. But of course, there is another trackway that they described from another area in the same region, rocks that are a bit older, probably around 126,000 years old. They describe a linear depression in the sandstone, about 95 centimeters long and about 13 centimeters across. It is just like a long runway of a track. The margins are raised as though sediment was pushed off to the sides, and there are some striations along inside the structure, as if something was dragged across the ground. The shape becomes gradually shallower until it disappears, essentially. And at the very end of it, there is a raised oval structure within the sediment. The authors discuss a whole bunch of things that this could potentially be. They conclude that most likely this is a Hyrax buttock drag.
Yeah.
This is a thing Hyraxes do. As far as I have read in this paper, we don't actually know why they do it. Like, this is a thing, like your dogs and cats will do this at home. They'll like drag their butts around. But often when they're doing it, it's like to scratch an itch or to like get some junk off of if there's something caught in their fur or something. But Hyraxes apparently do this a bunch, and we don't entirely know why they do it. They suspect that this is a butt drag, and that little raised oval structure at the end of the line might be a poop.
That's what I was wondering.
They do discuss other options. So they point out that it could be like a branch dragged by the wind, but there's no other evidence of strong wind in the sediments. It could also be a predator dragging prey along the ground, right? Big cats will do this. Ancient humans were around at that time and place, and they certainly could have dragged something around. But there are no other tracks nearby. And you'd expect, if this was like a leopard dragging a carcass, you'd expect to find leopard tracks right next to it. They talk about others, like there could be an elephant dragging its trunk or a gazelle running its horns along the ground, but those don't explain the little poop structure. They describe it is consistent with a butt drag because, and this I am quoting directly from the paper because every now and then scientists get to write a line in a paper that I am just so envious of. As they describe, there are no footprints associated with this track. And that is as expected because, quote, the forefoot and hindfoot tracks would be obliterated by the subsequent passage of the buttocks.
Yep, that's what I was thinking. It's like, we shouldn't find any footprints in this trench because you're sweeping them away with your bottom.
So they describe in the paper that a buttock drag is probably the least unlikely explanation.
Yes. Yep.
And if that's the case, that makes it not only the first known Hyrax butt drag fossil, but probably the first known butt drag trace fossil ever reported.
That's fantastic. That's just so delightful. It's fun when we get fossils like this because I hadn't even thought about that being a behavior we would even consider to capture.
Yeah.
Like, but as you said, it is a thing some mammals do, and it's potentially put many purposes, but I just had never considered of it being something that could fossilize.
Yeah. The paper talks about, this is a very exciting and funny and silly thing to find, but the paper discusses it in the context of the broader implications that there are lots of trace fossils Hyraxes can leave behind. And if these footprints and this butt drag are in fact rock Hyrax trace fossils, that means there could be more in this area. Those additional trace fossils could include more trackways that could be informative, but also middens, which could have, plant material and all sorts of stuff gathered from the surrounding environment. So the paper's sort of underlying purpose is to say there's a lot we can learn from rock hyrax fossils, and we haven't done enough looking and reporting yet. Let's go do it. They just so happen to have started with what appears to be the runway formed by the tuchus of an ancient rock hyrax.
Fantastic. That makes me so happy.
But in your request now for butt dragging
Yes.
episode topic.
I would be so happy if we find out that there actually is way more to say about that than we personally. It's like, actually,
if
there's a really
if there's a
crazy-
whole episode's worth of information to talk about butt dragging, we'll find ourselves a butt drag expert. We'll get him on the podcast.
Oh, well, my first news, the animal in it does also have a notable bottom, but in a much less cute way. This is about a fossil leech. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you were going to take this one.
I sure did, and it's very neat. This is research by Danielle Descarli et al. In Paleontology and Evolutionary Science, and the article is a press release from Science Daily. This is a very exciting fossil because leeches, which are annelid worms, so along with earthworms, they are the segmented worms. They are extremely poorly understood because they have very little to basically no fossil record. We know very little about their history. This fossil is one of the only fossils we know of, especially for this group of leeches, and was found at the Brandon Bridge Formation in Wisconsin, which is known for preserving bodies of soft tissue of delicate animals like this. It's preserved in very nice detail and had enough features to ID it as a leech, even though it wasn't recognized right away. The notable things that it has is the segmented and teardrop-shaped body, which is a very leech feature, and a tail sucker. So leeches today have a little suction cup on the end of their back end, and then they have the sucker mouth up front. And they use those, many land, terrestrial leeches will use those to kind of inchworm around and hold on to one structure as they reach around looking for someone to grab onto.
Yeah, they'll get on like a leaf and suction cup to it and then reach up like a baby asking to be picked up.
Yep.
Waiting for something to walk past so that they can attach to it.
Asking for nom-noms. This one has the tail sucker. And so that combination is only found in leeches. So ID, this is a leech. It is a new species, Macromyzon siluricus, and phylogenetic analysis resolves that as a stem leech, so toward the base of the leech tree. So this is a very well-preserved leech, which we do not usually get. It is one of the very few fossils and one of the only body fossils that is known for this group. I think the article may have said it is the first, but I just playing it safe, it is definitely one of the first.
Often in papers like this, you'll see the authors hedge a little bit.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, this is the oldest known body fossil of this group of leeches from this time period.
Yes.
Just to be safe, there might be one out there that they missed in the literature that hasn't been reported yet.
Exactly. It for sure sounds like it is the first one known from this formation. So
cool.
For this site, it is the first leech known, and it is an old leech. Its date range is somewhere between 436 and 437 million years old, which is notable for two big things. One, this is close to the age estimates for the origin of segmented worms.
Mm-hmm.
So this is back toward the beginning of the overall group they're in, and is at least 200 million years older than the previous estimates for the origin of leeches.
Ooh.
So pushes the date back for leeches way further, and this leech might give us some information about what early leeches were doing. For the main thing that it lacks, it does not have a mouth sucker.
Oh.
So it has the suction cup on the butt end, but not on the mouth end. This, along with the fact that the sediment it's in is marine sediment, so ocean sediment, suggests some potential insights into what early leeches were doing, and that they were doing something different than most modern leeches. First off, suggests that they were marine, which is not out of the question for all modern leeches. There are other marine leeches, but most are freshwater and many are terrestrial. But it also suggests that they were not parasitic, not feeding on blood at least. This does make sense for a couple of reasons. One, specializations for feeding on blood are quite complex.
Sure. Episode 134.
So having all the features to do that are something that like makes sense that they might have come along later in the line. And if they were feeding differently, the paper suggests that two likely options would be swallowing prey whole, so like going after small marine invertebrates, or maybe drinking their internal fluids, like not blood specifically, but other bodily fluids, and feeding on those more normally.
Sure. Well, leeches today are famous for being bloodsuckers, but there
Mhm.
are carnivorous leeches. There are
Yes, indeed.
predatory leeches that eat bugs, or there are even leeches that hunt and eat other leeches.
Yep, and like earthworms and stuff. There,
Mm-hmm.
if you want a really great horrifying video, there's an awesome video of a leech hunting an earthworm and just slurping it up like a very big piece of spaghetti.
You know, it's funny. I was ready to joke, I don't want that. Thank you very much. But then you described the video and I was like, oh, I've seen that video.
Yep.
It is
It's one
very
of my
cool.
favorites. I love showing that to people. So yeah, a very early leech and a really nice body fossil for a rarely fossilized group.
Yeah, it's interesting that the fossil is so far off from the genetic estimates for when the group would
Hmm.
have originated. And it does make me wonder if our modern leeches are all part of a group that did originate later,
Yeah.
and that this is part of a more ancient diversity
Yes.
of leeches that were doing a bunch of different things.
Exactly. Like the ones we have might be a notable offshoot and be skewing the signal a bit.
Yeah, very cool and gross. Well, my next bit of news, a little something different, is about footprints. Trace fossils, but this time not from Africa, from Europe, and not from hyraxes or leeches, but from humans, specifically our closest ancient relatives, Neanderthals.
Cool.
This is research published in Scientific Reports by Carlos Neto de Carvalho, and we will link in the blog post to an article on ZME Science by Mihai Andre. This paper describes two new track sites, very much like the last paper I talked about, two track sites from the coast of Portugal. And it sounds like these are the first Neanderthal tracks known from, if not any Portuguese coast, at least this region of Portugal. One of the sites is very simple and straightforward. The site is called Praia do Teiro. There is a single footprint identified as Neanderthal from about 82,000 years ago. The other site, which is the one that has gotten so much of the attention that I almost missed that there were two sites. The second site is called Monte Clarigo. It is a little bit younger, about 78,000 years ago. There are three trackways of footprints identified as belonging to three different individuals. The different individuals left trackways of very different sizes. The largest tracks appear to have come from a full grown, and the authors point out probably a male, because males, like in our species, tended to be on average a bit bigger. They estimate that this track maker was probably around 1.7 meters tall, or 5'7".
All right.
Some of the tracks are significantly smaller and appear to have been made by a child. They estimate that this child would have been between 7 and 9 years old. So a little kid. And then there are a set of itty bitty prints, each of which is about 11 centimeters long,
Aw.
that appear to be the prints of a Neanderthal toddler.
Aw.
They estimate that this one would have been less than 2 years old.
That's very cute.
So this appears to be an adult and two children walking along the coast. This could be a family group, right? This could very well be a parent and their two children, although from footprints that is impossible to say. But it is very likely that they were all three traveling together, because it doesn't make a ton of sense for a 2-year-old to be wandering along the beach by themselves,
Yes.
especially given that we have these trackways alongside it. The footprints show a couple of interesting patterns. One is that they appear to be going to and from the shore. So they're kind of perpendicular to the shore, which suggests that they might have been looking for food. This is something that has come up a lot in recent research about Neanderthals, is their dependence on coastal resources. There's a lot of evidence to suggest Neanderthals in a bunch of places were hunting bigger animals or going after rabbits and stuff like that. But there's also a growing amount of evidence suggesting that they were going after fish or shellfish, and that this kind of flexibility, this ability to utilize a bunch of different resources, might have helped them survive through the harshest parts of the Ice Age. So here and the other site, which is also coastal, seem to support this idea of the Neanderthals hanging around in coastal areas. There are also some tracks nearby that appear to be deer tracks. So it is also possible that they were following, or the paper even suggests possibly ambushing among the dunes these deer. Although, again, if they were all walking together, it seems less likely that they were out there to do anything potentially dangerous. Because if you're going to go out and tackle a deer, you leave your 2-year-old at home.
Yep.
If you can. A couple other really interesting things about the footprints themselves. The footprints were left on what is geologically an ancient sand dune. So this was a coast, this was a dune area. The dune appears to have been about a 35-degree slope. And the footprints show that the Neanderthals were walking in a diagonal curving pattern up along the slope, which makes it easier to climb the slope. This is if you ever have walked up a big dune or a hill that is falling apart. Walking straight up from the bottom to the top can be harder than taking a more diagonal or sideways approach. Apparently, these Neanderthals knew to do that, which is pretty cool. Not surprising, but very cool to see.
It's always fun when we can see, like, oh, yep, no, I get what you're doing. I've been in that situation.
Yeah. Also, the little tiny toddler footprints. So that you picture a classic human footprint, there is that arch where the footprint is narrow in the middle because of the way that our foot sort of curves upwards in the middle. The toddler footprints don't have a defined arch. They are just sort of flat-footed, whereas the adults have that arch, which is also true for our species.
Yeah.
Baby feet start out flat and the arch develops as we get older, which suggests that Neanderthals also developed in a very similar way that we do, right down to the shape of their feet.
So cool.
This is one of those this is one of those studies that is really exciting on multiple levels, because on the big grand level, it is telling us about how Neanderthals were surviving, where they were living, what places they were finding the most useful, how they were traveling, all of that sort of big picture stuff about how Neanderthals were successful and the questions of why they eventually stopped being successful and went extinct, all the way down to the very little small scale thing that this was a adult Neanderthal walking around the sand dunes with a couple of kids, maybe showing them how to collect clams, maybe teaching them how to walk up a dune effectively. Like this was
Mm-hmm.
just Neanderthals out for a walk one day.
So neat, and it's always satisfying when you get to have that moment of these like truly ancient peoples were peoples. It's
Yep.
just
They were there is no way to define human and
mm-hmm.
not include Neanderthals.
Yes,
These were humans.
absolutely.
These were ancient humans.
One thought I had along those lines is when you're saying that like the footprints are kind of meandering, like maybe they were looking for food and resources on the beach. I was like, well, maybe that's what the adult was doing. That toddler was looking for seashells.
Yeah, I also had that thought, and I didn't read a detailed description of like the trajectory of it,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea of the footprints kind of going in and out of away from the shore. Also, it brings to my mind like a little kid chasing the tide,
Yep, yep.
right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
waves come in and then they go back out, and you chase them, and then the waves start coming in and you run away from them.
Yep.
Yeah, for fun.
Yeah. And that's just like, we can't know what they were doing. We can't know who they were and why they were there, but it is so easy to put our minds in the potential stories of those footprints. And that's one of the neatest things about finding ancient human like, trackways and things like that to me.
Yeah, and it's always, as scientists, we always have to be cautious of getting too flowery with our stories, right?
Yes.
We don't want to interpret more than is reasonable to interpret. We don't want to paint a picture that is unrealistic. But with Neanderthals and other ancient humans, it's just, even if that isn't what was happening in this particular moment, that is not at all unreasonable. At
Yes.
some point, a Neanderthal child ran away from the waves. There is almost no way that that didn't happen. Again, these were humans. That was a human toddler. And
Yes.
that's what 2-year-old humans do.
Yay. Very cute.
All right, I brought it back from leeches to like cute and friendly and familiar. So keep that up.
So I this really depends on who you ask as to whether or not I'm staying on brand or I'm redirecting again. Island spiders?
Listen, I think our audience is probably still on board.
I think these island spiders have surprisingly tiny little cute genomes.
Okay, you're pushing it, but I'm on
Yeah,
board.
right. petite.
Oh, just an adorable little genome.
This is research by Vadim Pisarenko et al. In Molecular Biology and Evolution, and the article is a press release in phys.org. Red devil spiders are found on the Canary Islands where they have become extremely successful. So
Okay.
they colonized these islands a few million years ago, since the islands only became a place to colonize a few million years ago. And they underwent huge diversification. There's nearly 50 endemic species to these islands, which makes up 14% of all the species for this genus, which is Dysdera. But the island spiders seem to have notably reduced genome sizes.
Interesting.
This is interesting for a couple reasons. One, it contradicts typical expectations for evolution in these kinds of situations. Typically, island colonizing species, the genomes we see are larger with more repeated elements.
Huh. So their right, the genome is your complete genetic code. They have more. There is a greater number of genes or number
Mhm.
of sequences. There's just more DNA crammed into each of those cells.
Yes, and typically more repetitive elements to the DNA, more repeated codes.
Huh.
This is partially, what's often thought to be either due to either or a combination of the founder effect, which is a small population survives or gets into a place and then spreads out to take over, which means you start out with a small genetic diversity, small selection of the genomes of that species.
Right. So the ones that
And
made it to the island might just happen to have been the ones that had this mutation for a larger genome.
yes, and that you're working with a smaller variety, so you have less diversity, which could lead to that increase in repeated elements and stuff, and that also can go along with a lowered selection pressure on islands. That if there's not as much aggressive natural selection going on as the mainland, then your DNA is allowed to build up some junk DNA, some repeated elements, and kind of become a bit more cluttered, so to speak. This study is looking into the genome of these spiders in more detail, partially to investigate why it seems to be contradicting this typical trend, and because genome size has been a question among biologists and geneticists for a long time. You will find closely related species that have very different genome sizes. And sometimes that can be answered by things like genome duplication in plants. But in other times, it's harder to answer how and why that happened. And there doesn't seem to be a consistent answer for, like, well, in these ecosystems we see, and in this kind of pressure we see. So they're hoping that maybe these spiders will help open up some of the doors and boxes and answer this question a bit. They did a detailed genomic analysis of one of the island species and a mainland species in the same genus. And they found that, yes, indeed, the genome was much smaller, like almost half the size. So, like half the base pairs of the mainland species. And that reduction happened in all genomic elements. So, like all different sections and kinds of genes.
Yeah, it wasn't just like one specific chunk of the genome disappeared. It
Exactly.
shrank all over.
Yes. They did note that a bunch of the loss was in transposable elements, which are those genetic elements that can move and do things like that. But that the smaller genome of the island species, though more compact, is more diverse than the mainland species. So it hasn't just lost genetic information, it has become more efficient, it seems, in packaging a higher amount of diversity in a smaller amount of base pairs.
Interesting. Got rid of the clutter.
Yeah, this is evidence of intensified natural selection, not
Mm-hmm.
reduced, which suggests that when the spiders got to the Canary Islands, there was enough room or ideal situations for them to have relatively high numbers and therefore maintain diversity and more intense natural selection and competition to drive the selective pressure for this still very complex and yet compact genome, and may have been also one of the drivers for eliminating unnecessary DNA. This does potentially serve as some evidence to answering the questions of why we see genome size changes. There have been hypotheses for when we see that these changes could be direct adaptations, benefits, while others have linked to them being non adaptive and being more having to do with the balance between accumulating and removing of repetitive elements. So gaining of repeated sections and loss, purifying of repeated sections. This seems to lean more toward that second situation than that this was some adaptation that aided them, that it was more just the balance shifted to removing unnecessary DNA, and that shrunk down the genome.
Very interesting. Island evolution is always so much fun to talk about because on the one hand it feels so predictable, but
Hmm.
then it seems like it's predictable in opposite directions.
Yeah.
Like species that move to islands tend to get bigger. Yes, except when they get smaller. And
Yes.
species that move to islands tend to become more herbivorous, except the ones that become more carnivorous. And sometimes your genome gets extra big and sometimes your genome gets extra small. That it's just moving to an island powerfully drives evolving to be different.
Yes. Yep.
Different than what it was on the mainland, but what different looks like changes from situation to situation.
Yeah, it's a beautiful collection of contradictions.
Very cool stuff.
And with that, we can wrap up the news and start talking about animals that eat things even smaller than spiders, which are our anteaters. Let's talk a bit about them and all the features they have to do that job.
Nom, 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 nom.
To start our discussion of ant eating, let's define what we mean by ant eating.
I bet I know.
Yes, it seems like a very straightforward answer, and this one mostly is.
This isn't one of those episodes where we're like,
Yes.
and actually, this turns out to be very difficult to define. Now, anteating means you eat ants.
It means you eat ants. The one like caveat, which isn't surprising, is that ant eating and termite eating often overlap. Many things
Yeah.
that eat one often eat the other, so they often get kind of synonymized when you talk about them.
Sure. The term myrmecophagy, which
Yes.
literally means ant, myrmeco is from ants, often also means termite eating.
Yes. There is a term, termitophagy,
Sure.
for eating termites, but even things that talked about them said the two terms typically get used pretty interchangeably.
Yeah. This is just what termites get for being too good at being ants.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So throughout this episode, when we say ant eating, we will often be generalizing that they eat ground-dwelling eusocial insects, and myrmecophagus or myrmecophagus is going to be the term that gets used most often. There are times where we will be specifically talking about termite eaters, and
Sure.
we'll specify that, but in general, most of the features we discuss and most of the groups we discuss, if they eat one, they will often be willing to eat the other. So they
Yes.
typically overlap. This episode, as we mentioned, we will be focusing on the anteaters, but we are going to be looking at the wider behavior of ant eating as a specialization because they are not the only ones to have done it. And this is because ants are such a readily available food source, and ants and termites together, that it just makes sense to include them in your diet and potentially make them your diet.
Yeah.
I found one paper that noted that occasional ant and termite eating is very common and that over 200 mammal species feed to some extent on ants and termites. They still probably eat other things or even mainly other things, but that ants and termites make it their way into the diets of many animals.
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind is chimps.
Yeah.
Who are, they'll do the probe, they'll get a stick and they'll stick it into an ant colony and pull it up and then eat the ants off of it. That is specialized techniques for eating ants in a species that obviously is mostly not eating ants.
Exactly. But they're just so readily available, and they're just these little nuggets of protein that it just makes sense if you can to do it.
It'd be stupid not to eat them.
Exactly. Just to emphasize how much sense it makes that this has happened. Ants and termites are just such a global phenomena. They're found in basically every terrestrial habitat except for polar regions.
Mm-hmm.
They are also common in basically every habitat they're found in, and that they are so numerous. We mentioned some of these numbers when we talked about that news, which we will be touching on here in a second, of the repeated evolution of anteaters. Estimations have individual ants at around 20 quadrillion, and they make up most insect biomass in tropical ecosystem, where they outweigh all other insects, mammals, amphibians, and birds combined.
Yeah.
Worldwide, termites outweigh all wild mammals by an order of magnitude.
Whew.
Together, they account for the highest biomass in terrestrial environments, minus us and cattle, accounting for a combined biomass of 12 megatons of dry carbon.
That's wild. These are nonsensical numbers.
Yes.
That is so much. Listeners, go check out episode 149 about ants and submit your request now for an episode about termites.
Absolutely. Another thing that they have going for them as a food source is that they are basically all eusocial, or at least social. They live in groups,
Right. Bet you can't eat just one.
and that means if you find one, there are more nearby. So you're
Yes.
not usually having to hunt them individually. You can follow them back to the nest and gorge on this
Yes.
ready supply.
In fact, it's kind of hard to only grab one ant or termite.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're reaching in to scoop up an ant, you're gonna get a bunch of ants.
Now, the downside to making them your food is ants are notoriously a bad idea to mess with. They
Yeah.
are famously nasty to bother. They bite, many of them sting. They have defenses, chemical defenses, soldier casts with extremely powerful bites, nests that are defensible or complicated or deeply buried or tough. So, if you are going to focus on them as your main food, you need to specialize.
Yes.
A couple episodes, we talked about a news that touched on the specializations and how many times this lifestyle has evolved, specifically in mammals. And this is part of the inspiration for this episode. That news was so cool that as soon as I saw we had requests for anteating and anteaters, I wanted to do it. This is a study this year, 2025, by Thomas Vita, Zachary Calamari, and Philip Barden. Thanks to Thomas for sending the full paper to me, where they reviewed a bunch of papers and 4,999 mammals to look at their diets and see how many times and what is the pattern of ant eating and how it's evolved in mammals. And this is where they found the now to me famous aspect that ant eating as a lifestyle or as a specialization has evolved 12 different times across mammalia throughout placentals, marsupials, and monotremes, and that there were even 2 more instances that might be cases that weren't able to be confirmed in this study, both showing an amazing amount of convergent evolution and emphasizing how powerful ants are as a evolutionary driver for diet and lifestyle. Some of the interesting things about this pattern, it is not randomly distributed across mammals. Certain groups definitely seem to evolve it more often, and certain lifestyles seem to lend themselves to becoming myrmecophagous versus others. There are some groups that are very diverse but produced very low number of anteaters, while others, like carnivora, are extremely good, including 1/4 of the examples being carnivorans.
Wow.
They also noted that basically every instance they found came from insectivorous, so already insect eating, or carnivorous ancestors. No
Interesting.
herbivores or omnivores seem to have specialized into being ant specialists.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They also noted basically no instances of a group reversing out of being an anteater.
Once you specialize, that's what you're doing now. It's hard to back up.
And this could be the fact that once you've gotten the toolkit to eat ants, it may be hard to go back to a toolkit that's good for anything else.
Yep.
Or that the food stability of becoming an anteater is so good, there's just not enough of a driver to evolve out of it very often.
Yeah, this is working.
Yep. The one example they noted was a genus of elephant shrews, Macroscelides, which seem to have transitioned from ant and termite feeding to omnivory, which is interesting since we
Huh.
have not seen it go the other way.
Yeah, that is interesting.
They do note that this group seems like they became anteaters in the early Eocene. So, one of the oldest originations among mammals of this lifestyle.
Yeah, some 50 million years ago.
So, it may mean that they had more time to evolve out of it than other groups. They also noted that it seems like once a group becomes myrmecophagous, they don't tend to diversify very aggressively.
Interesting. So as opposed to like flight, when animals
Exactly.
evolve flight, they explode and they're suddenly all over the place.
They noted 8 out of the 12 origins they found represent monotypic lineages that are one major line, not splitting after the fact.
Very interesting.
And then the other thing they noted was that basically all of these origins are during the Cenozoic after the end Cretaceous, and it seems that potentially ants were not yet a dominant enough force on the planet until then for this to be a viable strategy for mammals to evolve into.
Yeah.
At least is what they potentially propose.
There also weren't nearly as much diversity of mammals in the Cretaceous.
Yes, exactly. And then the other thing that this shows, which just going back to how awesome ants are, that ants are such engineers of convergent evolution. Like, this is more examples of convergent evolution than there are things that have evolved into crabs.
Yep.
And now is added to the list of like the thousands of species that mimic ants to defend themselves and avoid predators, and the hundreds of plants that have evolved to have symbiotic relationships with plants. Like, ants just drive convergent evolution because everyone has to deal with and respond to ants.
Yes. They are, in an unusual way, ecosystem engineers. They
Yes.
shape the ecosystem around them by their mere presence, the way that elephants do. But in this
Yes.
case, well, a very different way, but comparable to the effect that elephants have.
It's so cool. So let's talk about some of these mammal groups and the features and the way they go about eating ants. Most ant eating specialists, at least among mammals, tend to have a very similar suite of characteristics. They tend to be working with a similar tool set, and these are things that lend themselves to getting at and gathering ants as food, but also bulk feeding, because like eating grass, if you're gonna eat ants, they're numerous, but they're small, and they're not like super nutritious. They are, protein rich, but they're energy poor. So you need to eat a lot.
Yes, there's not a lot to an ant.
Exactly. Some of these features are ones that people are probably going to expect, because as you'll notice, these are all features of an anteater.
Yes. Anteater, which of course is the famous example. It's the one that's named
Yes.
anteater. Although
Yes.
my understanding is that a lot of the term anteater is also used for a bunch of other groups of animals.
It does. Some of the main features: long, sticky tongues. That's the famous feature of an anteater: long, sticky tongues, saliva that helps to grab the ants and also sometimes lubricate the movement of the tongue. Powerful forelimbs for digging, often equipped with big, curved, powerful claws for tearing open nests, for tearing into logs, for getting into the colony of the ants or termites. Basically, every ant-eating mammal has some amount of tooth reduction.
Yeah.
That they have reduced the size, number, features of the teeth, that the teeth are less complex, less notable, less pronounced.
Yes. Because you don't really need teeth to eat ants.
They're not, it's not efficient to chew them individually.
No, they go down pretty smooth.
Exactly, just and so many of them also have other tools for processing them: gizzard-like stomachs and rough roofs of their mouths to just crush and grind instead of chew each individual.
Yes. Well, you really want your ants to be a paste.
Yes, a slurry.
I have not personally eaten ants, but I know that there are. It's also not uncommon among humans to eat
absolutely.
ants. I don't think I've ever actually had an ant, but I assume that they're not very hard to eat.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, it's got to be just like chewing a little Rice Krispie. One thing they noted about if you do chew ants, typically what we see among animals that eat ants and are chewing them, you eat and chew very quickly, because the longer you chew them, the more likely you are to release any chemical defenses they have. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
You want to usually go ahead and swallow as fast as you can, because it gives them less time to release stuff, or bite your tongue or your mouth, like, and swallow.
Yeah, you really don't want to give an ant the opportunity to react.
No, Some less obvious features, things that you can't see, many of them have lowered body temperatures and slower metabolisms. Goes along with a low energy diet.
Yeah.
we see this in lots of animals that specialize in a very specific food. Koalas being very low energy, eating just eucalyptus, things like that.
Yeah, you'll also know animals that have that kind of specialty also tend to eat things that don't require a lot of energy to collect.
Exactly. They're not chasing the ants.
Right. It doesn't actually take a lot of effort to go after ants. You're mostly sitting in one place and digging and slurping.
Exactly. Another thing that absolutely makes sense, but I hadn't thought of, is you need special digestive tools because ants are high in chitin.
Yep, that makes sense.
So, chitin being the building blocks for many insect exoskeletons, ants are very armored among insects. Like, they are not soft insects, they are very rigid. So, they are high in chitin, even compared to, like, I saw it noted, termites are less tough to eat. They're
Mm,
softer insects, they're softer bodied. Ants are tough. Many of the insect eating mammals we see have emphasized a suite of genetic traits called chitinase acidic genes, or Kia genes. These Kia paralogs, there are 5 functional paralogs among placental mammals.
hmm
Among mammals, the ancestor to like all placentals probably had 5 functional ones, and we've seen that different groups have different amounts of them active. But the notable thing is in mammals that have like low insects in their diet, they may have a couple functional or no functional chia paralogs. And then animals that have high insects in their diet have more active ones. And then when you look at things like anteaters and aardvarks, they have 4 or all 5 fully active.
Yep, that makes
So
sense.
genetic convergence that helps them digest this very specific food. And many of these features are often described as anteater convergence features. They will describe the feature and then say, like an anteater, similar to the
Yes.
anteater, because as you said, there's a group named for this, and they are arguably the best at it.
This kind of thing came up. I think this was in the hopping episode, which was 193. The idea of a convergent suite of
Yes.
characters. Oh no, it was Sabreteeth. That's what it was. It was 214.
Right. Yes.
Which
Yes. Yes.
is
Yes.
there is a list of features that show up again and again in saber-toothed animals. You get the same thing with anteaters. It's like you're not just typically convergent on one thing. You
Mm-hmm.
have the full set.
Yeah. And it makes sense for what you're going after. So let's talk about anteaters. These are xenarthrans. These are the group anteater. These are found in Central and South America. They are in the order Pilosa along with sloths. So xenarthrans
Mhm.
include anteaters, sloths, and armadillos.
Yes, this is
They're in the
our third. Sloths was episode 24, and episode 153 was armadillos, including like glyptodonts and stuff.
yes.
Anteaters is the final major xenarthran group.
Man, is this the first like big taxa we've
We
completed?
finished it. We collected the whole set.
We 100%ed Xenarthra?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of did. All right, listeners, let us know which group you want us to 100% next.
Cool. All right, I want the achievement. Someone make a little achievement pop up. Bleep bloop. This, the anteaters are in the suborder Vermilingua, which means worm-tongued.
Yep.
This group is split up into 2 families, Myrmecophagidae, which includes the genus Myrmecophaga, the giant anteater, and the genus Tamandua, the northern and southern tamanduas,
Mm-hmm.
and then the family Cyclopedidae, which is the genus Cyclopes, the silky anteater.
Mm.
There are only 4 anteater species generally. Some have been proposed to be split into others, but generally agreed, there's really only 4 anteaters alive today.
Yeah, it's a pretty small group.
Yeah, they are not diverse, at least species wise. There is physical diversity among them, but they are not a speciose or I think particularly numerous group. They are similar in many regards. They're mostly solitary. They all have pretty poor eyesight, mainly relying on a strong sense of smell and some on a stronger sense of hearing. They have that low body temperature, which is also true for all xenarthrans.
Yep. Yeah, sloths are like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're really weird in that regard. They all also have long and often powerful tails, most of which are prehensile or semi-prehensile, so being able to grab onto stuff. They've got small mouths, long snouts. They
Mhm.
have no teeth. They are the extreme of tooth reduction.
Yes, if you ever get the chance to look at an anteater skull, it is just a tube. The face, there's a like a half normal skull in the back, and then it just becomes a long featureless tube.
It looks like something like someone sculpted out of clay and just
Yes.
didn't want to put a lot of detail into it. It's so
they
uniform.
just they just rolled it between their hands.
And then poke two eye holes.
Called it a day.
Anteater. They've got very long tongues. Their tongues are extremely specialized. They have small hooks, papillae, those keratin tongue structures that we talked about in the tongue episode.
Episode 192.
Theirs hook backwards to help grab the insects and pull them into the mouth along with their sticky saliva.
Like Velcro.
Their tongues do not attach inside the throat, but all the way down in the sternum because of how long they are. They are also very fast. They can move in and out of the mouth 150 times a minute. It's just boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
and. They have very gizzard-like stomachs, which also have hardened folds inside to aid in the grinding of the ants. They also use
Whoa.
grit that is brought up while eating ants to help digest and process the ants. And then, very famously, they have big ol' claws. Just these
Yeah.
big meat hook claws on very powerful front limbs. The rest of their digits, so their third digit is the one that has a giant claw. Then the rest are often quite reduced. So they have secondary claws, but many of them they're kind of I think some of them are down to like 3 digits and the others are quite small.
Interesting. So mostly they are one claw. Interesting.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, to avoid the defenses of the ants, they eat quickly, typically spending about a minute at a nest and then moving on to the next nest.
Just
Yeah.
150 tongue flicks, and then you move
Yep.
on.
It said that the giant anteater can visit up to 200 nests a day to feed itself.
Wow. That does also make sense. Much like how we said you want to digest an ant as quickly as possible, you really don't want to hang around an ant colony.
Yeah, for them to mount a resistance.
Yes.
And yeah, they're very much a smash and grab predation style of
Yeah.
they open the nest, lap up a few hundred ants, and then get out of there. And they can come back to that nest when they've calmed down.
Before the ants even know what hit them.
Horrifying. Your roof just gets pulled out. A giant
Yeah.
hooked tentacle laps in at like 50 miles an hour.
Pulls up a few hundred ants are gone.
It's just whoosh, gone. What just happened?
Yeah, Fred? Half of those ants were named Fred. Fred was...
Yes. Fred 1 through 50?
Actually, I guess Philomena, maybe.
Yes. When we look at the diversity of anteaters, we do see that larger species tend to be more terrestrial and smaller species tend to be more arboreal up in the trees.
Sure.
The biggest being the giant anteater. This is the only member, as mentioned, in the genus Myrmecophagy. It is the largest of all anteaters with an average length of like 2 meters or like 6.5 feet. So like big animals. They can weigh up to 33 kilograms or 73 pounds.
Whew,
so like
big dog.
Chunky. Yeah. They are very terrestrial. I did not see mentioning of them climbing. So
Sure.
I don't know that they really could get up into a tree very easily. Yeah, I don't put it past any animal because there's so many times where you're like, these animals can't climb. And then here's a picture of one like hiding from something in a tree.
Yeah. Listen, they've got the big claws.
You learn to climb when you have to.
They've got dexterous arms.
Mhm.
They weigh less than me. And
Yes.
I could climb. I could get myself up in a tree if I needed to.
But they are notably specialized for living on the ground. Unlike the other anteaters, they knuckle walk. So they actually walk much more like a gorilla to avoid their
Yeah.
claws, and they are specialized walkers.
They're all... does that make them the largest living xenarthrans?
It might. I
assume
per
so.
weight, we'll get to another one. The giant armadillo might outweigh them just because it's an armadillo.
Oh, yeah, that
But
makes sense.
dimensions wise, this is by far the most intimidating Xenarthran because they're long, they're tall, and
Yep.
they're maned. They've got like a mohawk on the back. Their tail has this long fan of fur. Very intimidating, impressive looking animals.
They also will stand up on their hind
Mm-hmm.
legs to grab at things or dig stuff or show off. So they
Yes.
really are carrying on that giant ground sloth legacy.
Yeah, they are. Yep. And that standing display of come at me, bro, with my claws out
Yes.
is an anteater defense display. All the anteaters do that in one form
Yeah.
or another. They will stand, present their claws, and go, if you come into the hug range, I'm tearing you open.
If you come within melee combat range,
Yep.
I gotta reach a 5 feet.
I will can opener you. It's your move. Another interesting thing about them, and I believe this is true for the other species, but I only saw it noted for the giant. And I also think this is true for other mammals. But once again, I only saw it specified here. They do not produce stomach acid, or at least not much. Instead, they use the formic acid defenses of their ants as their acid source.
That's awful.
Yep.
Well, because you mentioned that they're using the grit from the nest to help grind up the ants, and they're also using the acid within the ants to digest them. That's mean. That's really all those Philomeninas are in a bad place.
This is an animal that outsources almost its entire digestive process.
It's like the Empire. You're going to be the tool of your own demise.
Yep. Well, it's just like I eat face huggers. Don't worry, they'll digest themselves because they're full of acid. Ridiculous. They also will eat other things other than ants, like beetle larvae, and some have been noted to dig into like honeybee nests and colonies. So other insects, other larvae, they will go after. They eat adult ants and eggs and larvae, so they use every part of the ant. The tamanduas, the lesser anteaters as they're sometimes called, the northern and southern tamandua. I also saw a collared tamandua for one of those. These are the next size down. They're 2 to 4 feet long, so a little under a meter to a little over a meter. They tend to be around 3 to 7 kilograms, so 7 to 15 pounds. Getting smaller but not tiny. They are semi-arboreal. They have a partially prehensile, grabbing tail that is partially hairless to, I assume, aid in that grip.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to spend, like I saw it described, they spend more than half the time in the trees, like 64% was cited. So a lot of time, but also quite a bit of time on the ground. Though they are notably less specialized. They were described as awkward on the ground. They kind of clench up their feet to walk, kind of like how orangutans do, where they're walking on the side and clenched feet because their feet are good for grabbing, not walking. And they also have to be careful to avoid puncturing their palms with their claws when they walk, so they don't want to knuckle walk the same way. And that they are incapable of galloping, which evidently the giant anteater can do.
Ooh.
Yeah!
That just keeps getting scarier.
They're so cool. They tend to go for more tree-dwelling ants and termites, also bees, beetles, and other insects. They have a less extreme lengthened skull. The giant anteater's skull is way longer than the other anteaters. Like proportionally, it is super elongated. Tamanduas have a long face, but more reasonable. They have a long tongue, which I forgot to mention this with the giant anteater. The tamandua's tongue can be upwards of 40 centimeters or 16 inches long.
Long tongue.
Which is almost as long as how far the giant anteater's tongue can be extended out of the mouth. The giant anteater's tongue is 60 centimeters or 24 inches long.
Ooh, so when I said that the ant, it has a reach of 5 feet.
Yep.
That includes the tongue.
Yeah, he can give you a wet willy from 5 feet away. They are also notably, and this is common with many ant-eating mammals, nocturnal. Yeah. A lot of these were noted for being often nocturnal. And then finally, we have the silky or pygmy anteater. This is the smallest species around today. Typical lengths are like 43 centimeters or 17 inches, weighing 235 grams or 8.3 ounces.
Oh, just little guys.
They're adorable, and they're fuzzy too. They
Yeah,
like the
they're
other two have
extremely
fur.
cute.
This one has fuzz. They seem to be completely arboreal. Like they do not come down to the ground very often at all. They have very prehensile tails, and their feet are fully modified for gripping. Their back feet have larger claws to help hold on to the tree branches.
Sure. More like tree sloths, it sounds.
Yes, exactly. They also have a much shorter face than the other anteaters and other ant-eating mammals. Like they actually have a really short skull for a ant specialist. The snout is fairly short and downturned, and proportionally is, as I saw it described, shorter than would be expected for an ant-eating specialist of their size. This is one of those cases where they have the big claw on the third toes and they have claws on the second toe. The fourth toe is small and clawless, and the remaining toes are vestigial or absent, often not visible.
Sure.
And then we have a bunch of other ant-eating mammals, some of which are very anteater-like and get called anteaters, as you mentioned. By far, the next most famous ant-eating mammal is the pangolin.
Yes.
This is the scaly anteaters. They have those shingle-like scaly armor on the body, unique to pangolins. No other mammal has ever that we know of has this kind of feature to it.
Yeah. Pangolins are also their own group. They are
Yeah.
not related to xenarthrans. They're their own unique, strange lineage.
Yes, they are found in Asia and Africa, and they are in the order Pholidota. They used to be grouped with Xenarthra because of how similar to anteaters they were. And for a long time, I saw it like described as people kind of insisted upon that, even as evidence started to build.
It's so
like,
weird. It gotta be
they
a
look
xenarthran.
so similar, and they have all the similar features. They're nocturnal, they have poor vision, they have long faces, they have long tongues, they have powerful claws up front. They are very anteater shaped. Their tongue also anchors into the sternum, just like an anteater's. So, like, physically, at a glance, yeah, they're also toothless. They're the other one of the other toothless ant-eating groups. So, very similar, very convergent. They are a famous case of convergent evolution.
Yeah.
One notable way in which they are not convergent with anteaters is those chia paralogs, the chitinase genes. Anteaters, the tamanduas cited specifically, have chia 1 through 4 activated, and the pangolin only has paralog 5.
Huh.
And that's likely because pangolin ancestors are more closely related to carnivora, who likely lost most of theirs, and pangolins had to make do with what was left.
Yeah, so they're kind of doing what giant pandas have done.
Yeah.
My ancestors were actually not very well shaped for this, and now I have to kind of figure out an unusual way to do it.
And so what they noted is that in like anteaters, the genes they have are active in different portions of the digestive tract to different degrees. And in a pangolin, this fifth paralog is active in the extreme everywhere.
Yep.
So they're just using what they've got as much as they can.
Pangolins are so cool.
They're awesome.
Send in your request now for a pangolins episode.
Another often compared and sometimes called an anteater is the aardvark, which in my mind is that's definitely third place for most like anti-mammal.
Yes. When you said you were leading up to the pangolin, you were like the one most anteater, like I was thinking aardvark, and then you said pangolin, and I felt a little silly. But then I was like, for sure, number 3 is aardvarks.
Oh yeah, aardvarks are. This is one of those where they have got to be one of the most known, if only because cartoons love aardvarks.
Yeah.
And if you look at an aardvark, I get it. They are so cartoony looking. Aardvarks are another African group. They are Afrotherians. So this is the group that includes elephants, manatees, hyraxes, aardvarks, and a couple of other groups that we will actually be mentioning. They are in the genus Orictoropus. If you haven't seen an aardvark, check the blog post for pictures. But they are very kind of pig-like in appearance in a lot of ways. They've got a very stout body, shorter, more powerful limbs. They have a very pig-like snout. It's flat on the end instead of tapered like an anteater's. But the ways they differ from a pig, they have a very long, powerful tail, which is another thing that we see in anteaters, the pangolin, and aardvarks.
Yep.
Big, powerful tails, which is often suspected to help them in like raising up and balancing while they get into the nest.
Yeah, like a kickstand.
Exactly. Very much like a kangaroo's.
Yep.
They also have long ears, like very long, prominent ears, which is different than like anteaters and pangolins, which have quite small ears by comparison. Tamandos have longer ears than the others, but in general, not particularly eared. They do have powerful front limbs with large claws, but theirs are a little bit different. They're not recurved hook-like claws that we see in pangolins and anteaters. These are more flat nails, almost hoof-like shovels.
Interesting. So doing a similar job, but structurally different.
Yes, exactly. These kind of have more of a chisel feel to it, and they can still get into stuff. I watched one digging into a pumpkin at a zoo, and so they can still like get their fingers into little hooks and get in there, but it's not these recurved claws, and it's possibly because they are very much walking around on their hands and feet, like most mammals do. And I wonder if that was like, well, yeah, but if I curve my claws, that messes up how I walk.
Yeah. So their claws are doing like a 1d6 as opposed to the giant anteater, which is coming in at like a d12.
Yes, absolutely. They do have an elongated face and a powerful neck, which is something we see in like the giant anteater. They've got flat snout with big nostrils, very strong sense of smell, while their eyes are quite small and consist of only rods, so not very powerful vision. They do have teeth, but their teeth are still quite reduced. They are born with incisors and canines, so front teeth and your sharp bitey teeth, but those fall out as they age and are not replaced as adults. And their teeth do not have enamel, which is that hard outer coating of the tooth. So adult aardvarks have these peg-like enamelless cheek teeth. They are rootless, so they keep growing. So as they wear down, they keep growing. So they're very simple, but they stick around. They're also structured in a weird way that inside they're made out of these parallel tubes of tube structures, each which has its own pulp cavity instead of one big pulp cavity like in the inside of our teeth. But they do not do a lot of chewing of the ants. Their stomach is also a gizzard.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So they also do most of their grinding inside the stomach. And then they also have a very long tongue. They eat mostly ants and termites, though I did see it noted that they do eat some fruits, specifically the aardvark cucumber.
Well, I mean, it's literally got their name on it.
Yes, exactly.
That's for them.
Evidently, they have a close symbiotic relationship with this plant, and the plant, like the seeds, propagate better if they've been digested by an aardvark, and that they often grow well because they are deposited around the burrows of the aardvarks, which is loose and fertile soil. Which is another thing to note here that is different than many of our others we've mentioned. Aardvarks are burrowers. They dig their own homes, which anteaters are good at digging into a nest, but are not burrowers the same way.
Sure.
They're not digging tunnels because their claws are good at grabbing and hooking open, but not shoveling dirt the way aardvark claws are. There are other members that are often described as anteaters or ant specialists or noted many elephant shrews, which are also in Afrotheria, along with golden moles and tenrecs, that all are often insectivorous, but some species are noted to eat mostly ants and termites as their meal. Another group that often gets called anteaters are echidnas, the spiny anteaters. These are the monotremes in Australia and New Guinea that are spiny-backed and long-snouted, and specifically short-beaked echidnas are very anteater-like. Long-beaked echidnas are not ant specialists.
Interesting.
They're going after like larvae and worms and stuff.
Sure.
Short-beaked ones, heavily anteaters. They've got the big, powerful claws. They've got a long tongue. They have many of the exact same features. They also are toothless, very similar. They were the only other one I found that they noted, not specifically that they use the ant acid to digest, but they have very low levels of acid. So I do wonder if they'd be doing something similar. If you want to hear more on that, we've talked about monotremes previously on the podcast, so you can listen there.
Episode 166. Also, spooky owlbears.
Yes. Another one that gets called the banded anteater is the noombat, which is a marsupial, so also in Australia. These are interesting because they do eat ants and they do have some features, but they are notably lacking many of the others that we've been consistently mentioning. If you looked at a noombat, I don't think you would suspect that it was an ant specialist.
Interesting.
They kind of look squirrel-ish. They're small-bodied, but not short or particularly powerful limbed. They've got a very normal looking, just mammal tail, just tapered tail coming off, not prehensile. They have not a short face, but not like a long tube face, just a little snout coming off and normal ears, and actually quite good vision because they are diurnal. But then if they yawn and you watch them stick out their tongue, they've got a real long tongue. There's a great video I've seen of one yawning, and then just this incredible tongue comes out and then comes back in. So they are ant specialists, specifically termites is what they're eating, but they lack many of the tools we would expect. They don't have big, heavy claws and powerful limbs. I saw it described as surprisingly effective claws for their size, but not ridiculous. So they can't actually break into termite mounds the way a giant anteater can, to just power through that concrete like dirt. They hunt the termites by sniffing out the nests and using their very sensitive smell, finding the galleries, which are areas used for feeding sites and reproduction areas. And these are usually more accessible under the surface, not that hard mound, but in more normal dirt. So they'll dig down into those specifically. So they're a bit more targeted where they go for, because they can't just break in anywhere. And then they'll lap up the ants the way everyone else does. It was also noted that they seem to lack many of the insect specialization features of their digestive tract that we see in many of the other groups. So you can get less specialized anteaters that seem to not be well equipped for the job, but yet are still doing quite well, mainly eating ants or termites. Two other examples that fall into that group of you don't look like an anteater until you look close enough: the sloth bear and the aardwolf.
Yep.
These are two carnivorans that have specialized to mostly eat ants, termites, or similar insects.
Yeah, we talked about the sloth bear in episode 217 and probably talked about the aardwolf way back in episode 109.
Yeah, I think so. So sloth bear is a bear, and they have long snouts, reduced teeth, and long tongue. They also have a very elongated and flattened palate, so the roof of their mouth, so they can form a sucking tube.
Yeah.
Which I saw noted that when they suck up prey, it makes a very loud sucking noise that you can hear from quite a distance away. The aardwolf is our first one that is actually very different in how they get at the prey. So everyone up till now basically has dug into. The sloth bear has big claws, everyone else has claws. Aardwolves do not dig for their termite meals. They lick them off the ground.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, they have a long sticky tongue and they have reduced teeth, but they're not going into the nest. They're just licking it off the ground like it's crumbs. So they notably do not destroy the mounds and cannot eat an entire colony.
Yeah.
And most ant-eating mammals don't, but some have been noted, like the sloth bear, of they might wipe out the colony when they get in there.
Yeah.
Aardwolves are just eating exposed termites.
Fascinating. Also, because I didn't mention it before, aardwolves, hyenas.
Yes. Thank you. I forgot to
They
say
are
that.
not. They are not wolves. They are not canines. They are hyenas.
They are hyenas, which I saw a fun mention on that unlike other hyenas, they don't scavenge or kill large animals. And if you do see them around carrion, they're probably not eating the carrion, but eating the insects eating the carrion.
That's cool.
Yep. I also saw one of the ones mentioned in that paper were mongoose, different species of mongoose being ant specialists. These are African mammals. They're meerkats are a member of this group. I didn't find anything about like how they're specialized for eating them, though they were all mentioned to eat them along with many other insects and things they eat. Evidently, potentially, the name meerkat, meer might come from a Afrikaans word for ant and then cat for cat, so ant cat.
Oh,
Yeah, but many of them were mentioned to build burrows specifically in termite mounds. So they are very closely related. And so I didn't find anything about them having like long tongues or anything like there being one who was super specialized, but they at least like living near them. And then coming back around full circle to xenarthrans, there are a number of armadillos that have evolved to be anteaters, and they have evolved to be very anteater like. Most armadillos will eat insects and have long snouts and reduced teeth. All xenarthrans have reduced teeth. Specifically, the giant armadillo and the naked-tailed armadillos. This is the subfamily Toliputinae. These have developed big, prominent, recurved claws and seem to be, many of them at least, mostly eating ants and termites. This is where we can check to see if the giant armadillo or the giant anteater holds a record for biggest xenarthran. Weights I found for it were 18 to 32 kilograms or 41 to 72 pounds, which puts them pretty close.
yeah. So they're about even.
Yeah. We also talked about armadillos already, so not going to go into too much information here, but these also are ant-eating mammals that are also burrowers. So you see some where I'm digging for insects, I'm also just good at digging, but there are a number of others that are notably not burrowers. So that's not always a feature of eating ants. I also didn't see any mention of the armadillos having particularly longer tongues. So I don't know if they're eating in a different way or going about it in any different way. So I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like there are a bunch of different groups that have converged on basically the full anteater suite of characters. And then you have others that are doing part of it, but are
Yes.
still able to specialize on ants. So there is this kind of gradient
Yeah.
from a little bit anteater like to full on giant anteater specialist. But all along the path, there are opportunities for being a dedicated myrmecophage.
And of the ones who haven't gone full anteater, the ways they have specialized are usually one of the anteater features.
Yes, it's still something convergent.
Yes, they have big hooked claws or they have a long tongue or some part of that setup that lets them get at ants really well.
Which is interesting because it is one of those wonderful situations where you can very intuitively see how that full anteater suite might have evolved over time. That
Absolutely.
ancestral anteaters might have gone through phases that were more similar to aardvarks or sloth bears or these other groups that are part of the way toward the full anteater situation.
Which would be a great segue to talk about that feature of anteater evolution if we had enough fossils to discuss how they became anteater like.
This is where I would put my anteater fossil. If I had one.
If I had one. As I saw it noted, anteaters contain the fewest extant and paleontological species of Xenarthra.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's why they haven't gotten their own episode yet.
Yeah, they are very poorly known. I'm pretty sure what I'm about to list off are all the anteater fossils we know of, or at least all the ones that are named. We do have anteater fossils. For instance, we have giant anteater fossils and southern Tamandua fossils from the Pleistocene and early Holocene. We do have some species, mostly from the Miocene, and some going into the Pliocene. Paleomyrmidon is from the Miocene of Argentina and is known from a fossil skull and seems to be a close relative of the silky anteater and is the only known extinct cyclopedid, but seem to be living on the ground instead of in the trees.
Interesting.
That's all I was able to find about that. Protamandua is from also the Miocene and is a relative of the giant anteaters and tamanduas. This one may have been a common ancestor to them, so might be, or at least close to that. It was larger than the silky anteater, but smaller than tamanduas, and does not appear to be specialized for walking or climbing, so it may or may not have had a prehensile tail. We don't know. Neotamandua, also a cousin of giant anteater and tamanduas. This is another one that has been suggested to be a close cousin of, potentially ancestral to, the giant anteater. Though I also saw it noted that their fossils and giant anteater fossils are very similar, so it might actually be same as or very, very, another species of giant anteater. Larger than tamanduas, not as big as giant anteaters. Does not seem like it had a prehensile tail, and the feet were similar to both tamanduas and giant anteaters, so probably somewhere between them in walking ability. And there's one other member in the genus Myrmecophaga, which is the giant anteater group that is from Argentina, and that is all the fossil anteaters that I was able to find confirmed for sure as fossil anteaters.
Yeah, not a lot.
Not a lot, no.
Well, and those are also mostly pretty recent.
Yes.
So we wouldn't expect them to be terribly different from modern anteaters. It does make me wonder, because when we have a limited fossil record of a group, often it is one of two things that have happened. Either their habitat or lifestyle, for one reason or another, means they just aren't getting fossilized very much, which I could see for right? They're arboreal, many of them. They're living out in these open regions where you might not be getting a lot of buildup of sediment. But also, sometimes we end up with a limited fossil record because the group evolved their defining characteristics relatively quickly.
Yes.
Right. This is the problem with bats and pterosaurs and stuff, is that it
Yes.
seems that what happened is they went from being not bats to bats in a fairly short amount of time. So all of our fossils are either full bat or not bats.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I do wonder if anteaters might have experienced something similar, where by the late Miocene, they were just anteaters. And so there's not a lot to go on for their evolution.
Which would make sense considering how weird and specialized they are. Super specialized groups often can pop up quite quickly because that level of specialization suggests there were heavy natural selection pressures to evolve that way. Now, it's according to estimates for the divergence of xenarthran groups, it seems like anteaters split off from the lineage that includes sloths about 50 million years ago. So
Interesting.
they should have been around for a while based off of our analyses, and them splitting off from the lineage with armadillos even earlier than that. So Pelosa split off probably almost right after the Cretaceous.
Yeah.
If not shortly before it. So we don't know exactly what was going on with them. We do not have a lot to know. Their fossil record is effectively entirely in the Americas, almost all South America.
Sure.
There are some potentials that are found in other places. I saw it described as 3 striking exceptions to that American fossil record. There is Ernanodon, which is from the Paleocene of China. This isn't an anteater, but an unidentified sloth from the Eocene of Antarctica, and a potential anteater Eurotamandua from the Middle Eocene of Europe.
Interesting. That's not where they should be.
No.
That's not where xenarthrans go.
It's very possible that they are something else and just look like.
Yes.
Eurotamandua I saw specifically cited as this one has been debated because of certain features. Its name meaning the European tamandua.
Right.
There's only one fossil we have, but it is a mostly complete fossil. There's a picture on the wiki that is a very pretty picture of Eurotamandua, and it looks very anteater-like. Long claws, elongated snout, features that suggest a sticky tongue based on the shape and everything. very tamandua shaped, even has a long prehensile tail.
Interesting.
Anteater shaped in every way and was classified within xenarthrans and among anteaters for a very long time. Currently, the seemingly mostly agreed upon stance is that it's actually a stem pangolin.
Oh, that does make a lot more sense. You're
Yeah.
much
Yep.
closer to where pangolins live now. And as we already discussed, pangolins are really good at being almost identical to anteaters.
Yep.
Fascinating.
There's no evidence that it has any of like the scales of a pangolin, but it lacks the xenarthran joints on the vertebra. Xenarthran backbones are crazy complex. Eurotamanduas are not. So currently, it is not a fossil anteater.
That makes me feel better. I like that.
Yes.
A
Yep.
European
Yep.
anteater makes me uncomfortable. That's not
Yes.
how it should work distribution wise.
Yep. I also struggled to find many fossil mentions of other ant-eating groups.
Yeah.
I did not come across that in my searches. I was able to find some fossil aardvarks that, for the most part, don't seem to be very aardvarky, but are in the aardvark group.
Sure. So they're not fossil ant-eating animals
Yes.
necessarily. They're just well, it's like bears, right?
Yes,
In
exactly.
episode 217, we talked about a bunch of fossil bears that are technically related to sloth bears, but are not part of the anteater discussion because they're bears.
Yeah. Like one group seems like it was predatory. Like elongated snouts with long canines and seem to be predatory cousins of aardvarks.
Interesting.
Not ant specialists. There was one that was very aardvark shaped. Plesiorictoropus, which is from the Pleistocene of Madagascar, was thought to be an aardvark, but now it seems like it's more likely a relative of golden moles and Tenorex that convergently achieved a very aardvark-like shape.
That, you know, it's funny at this point in our conversation of anteating evolution, that makes all the sense in the world.
Right?
These groups are it's so interesting to think about. This is a group of a dozen or so unrelated lineages, or at least separate lineages, that not only have converged on a very similar lifestyle and anatomy, but are converging with each other in a mosaic of different ways. Like
Yes.
some of them are more anteater, like proper anteater like. Some of them are more aardvark shaped. There is this interesting like club of ant-eating mammals that are not all the same, but are all connected and convergent with each other. That's really cool to know.
It's very interesting. It's a classic example of convergent evolution and often cited to explain how convergent evolution works because it's so consistent.
Yeah. The fact that we don't seem to have an extensive fossil record of ant-eating mammals is really interesting to me,
Yep.
because a lot of the features that characterize them are things that fossilize, right? The shape of the skull,
Yes.
the big claws, things like that. It makes me wonder if, now, on the one hand, most anteating specialists don't have teeth.
Yes.
And
Yep.
teeth is a huge way that we identify species in the fossil record. There are also a bunch of them, like aardvarks and sloth bears and aardwolves and stuff, that are not anatomically obvious
Yes.
anteating specialists. But it also does make me wonder if, because you're anteating, are you just living in places? Are you out in where the termite mounds are, in the desert or whatnot, and you're just not getting fossilized very much?
Yeah. Well, and also as the study mentioned, they don't typically diversify. And so a group
Mm.
that does become anteating does not then tend to spread out and take over the continent with many, many species. So I wonder if there's been lots of anteaters that have popped up and then gone extinct because
Yeah,
they
and
don't.
there were 10 species or something.
Yeah, exactly. That were around for a little while and then disappeared. Just they've been popping up but not sticking around.
Yeah, well, and they're also not, they're not diverse in terms of number of species. They're also not abundant,
Nope.
particularly. Like, there's not a huge population of giant anteaters or pangolins or things like that.
Yeah.
They tend to be pretty rare components of their ecosystems.
And it was noted with like the anteaters multiple times that giant anteaters need large territories to have enough ants and termites to sustain them. So very much like we've talked about with like big predators in the fossil record, you might only have one for every few 100 miles. So you might not have, they're not tightly clustered, and many of them are solitary. So yeah, they just aren't setting themselves up potentially to be easily found in the fossil record.
Fascinating.
Yeah. At this point, we will take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue talking about fossils for a little bit because there are other potential fossil ant-eating animals, but they're not mammals, they're dinosaurs.
Fun.
Yeah. When we talk about fossil anteaters, there is one group that often comes up that is potentially another group of ant and termite eating specialists. These are a group of small dinosaurs called the alvarezsaurs.
Mm-hmm.
They are maniraptoran dinosaurs, so theropod dinosaurs.
Yep, they're closely related to things like therizinosaurs.
Yes.
Episode
yes.
207, we mentioned alvarezsaurs.
They were around at the end of the Cretaceous and have a very interesting set of characteristics. They are, many of them, very small bodied, some of the smallest known non bird dinosaurs. Mostly have long, very running adapted hind limbs, so their legs seem to be very good for moving around. Very delicate skulls that seem to suggest very weak bites. Tiny, numerous, and tightly packed, simple teeth that have lost their recurve or their serrations of other theropod dinosaurs.
Okay.
They also don't seem to have any evidence of gastroliths, so they don't have any sign of that gizzard-like mill.
Right, those stomach stones.
Yes, so we don't have any evidence of that. And then, on at least later members of the group, very specialized and reduced front limbs, but robust front arms.
Yep.
These powerful, small front arms that have reduced the number of digits, usually to one or just a couple, with a big claw on the main digit.
Yeah, when you were describing the giant anteater, and you
Mhm.
I didn't know this about their claws, that you said, yeah, they have one giant middle claw, and then the others are reduced. I went, oh,
Uh-huh.
because that is a defining feature of some of these dinosaurs.
Absolutely. One of them, Mononicus,
Whose name means one claw.
one clawed. Some others, like Shibuya, have 2 digits with a prominent claw. Mononicus has one claw, one functional digit.
Yeah, each hand one is just it's just like a pick.
It just ends in this big old spike. And they also are notable for having a very different posture of the front limbs, where their palms face downward, like old movie theropods.
They're breaking the rule.
They're breaking the rules.
They're slappers. They're slappers
Yes.
and not clappers. Although, more accurately, they're probably slashers.
Slashers. Their forelimbs also have features that would have given them very strong leverage of the joints in the limb. Not a ton of motion in the limb, but there is a bunch of flexion in the claws. And it has been suggested that these could be tools for digging.
Mm-hmm. Mononicus, I think, if I remember right, was featured in the first season of Prehistoric Planet.
Yes,
and
yes.
I think it was depicted as an anteater.
Yes, indeed. There was one paper I found that looked at their claws and compared it to digging styles among vertebrates to see, of the diggers we have today, which of these styles seems to fit the front limbs of these dinosaurs best. The 3 kind of diggings they mentioned were scratch digging, which are things like aardvarks and armadillos and rodents that are downward facing palms and digging like shoveling, like how a dog digs.
Sure.
Humeral rotation digging, which is mole digging. Your palms are facing outward and you're putting them in front of your face and shoveling the dirt to either side. Moles, some frogs, amphisbaenian lizards, mole lizards. And then hook and pull digging, which is the anteater and pangolin, big hooked claws, palms facing downward and grabbing and pulling open stuff. They found that Mononicus's claws seem to be good for scratch digging and hook and pull movements, specifically scratch digging to make depressions but not burrows. So it doesn't seem like they'd be able to make tunnels, but maybe to dig down and make a depression in the dirt, but seem very well suited for hook and pull behaviors like anteaters and pangolins. This has led to the proposition that these might be ant-eating dinosaurs, anteater dinosaurs.
And in the late Cretaceous, there would have been lots of ants and termites around.
Absolutely. The specializations in their jaw, weaker bites, and simplified teeth also seem to lean toward that. They also do have long and fairly seemingly muscular tails, so they also have that in common. This is hard to confirm because we're trying to confirm the diet of an extinct animal, and that's tricky. We do not have any direct evidence of them eating ants or termites, so, stomach content even would probably not help us a ton because I don't even know if you would find remnants of ants and termites that would be identifiable in fossilized stomach content. So it is often suggested, but there are some evidences that might lean the other way. Some have cited that the limited motion of the front arms to them does not suggest they'd be good digging tools. They're quite limited in their range of motion. The front claws have a lot of motion up and down, but the arms are not actually quite dexterous.
Right. So you might not be able to get that powerful pulling back that you need.
Exactly. You just might not be very good at actually getting in there with those. There are some that give evidence against being anteaters. Specifically, earlier members of this group do not have these suite of features.
Sure.
So they do not have these arms, and they do have much more normal theropod mouths. Haploceras is an earlier member of the group that has unreduced grasping hands and large, powerful jaws with recurved, serrated teeth, and likely, it seems, a decent bite force.
So carnivorous, classic carnivore.
Full-on predators, yeah.
Now, you did mention earlier in the discussion that anteating has repeatedly evolved from carnivorous ancestors.
Absolutely. So it seems like there could have been a shift. They mentioned there's another study for Benicus, which is another earlier member of the group that has stomach contents that seems to suggest bony material, that it was eating and digesting bone, not just like swallowing it, but processing the bone, kind of like crocs do, of mostly digesting it.
Or hyenas.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be that earlier members were meat eaters, and then later members specialized into myrmecophagous diets. We also see a shift in early to later members in size. There is a trend of miniaturization among this group that is notably something that does not happen very often in dinosaurs. Two of the big examples are these dinosaurs and birds.
Yeah.
These got itty bitty, like less than a kilogram, and many of those have been confirmed to be adults. So they were full grown, teeny tiny little dinosaurs. And their size reduction also corresponds with the evolution of the reduced front limbs and specialized claws, and occurs during the late early Cretaceous, around the times that ants and termites would have been becoming more common.
Yeah.
So there does seem pretty convincing that these might be a group of anteater dinosaurs.
Yeah. It's also very interesting to think about. We talked about this a bit in the ants episode 149, but we don't have a ton of detailed information about what ants and termites were doing back then. So there is absolutely the possibility that these were specialized for eating ants, but the ants were doing something unusual.
Yes.
Right? That they were living on tree stumps or something, and they were breaking open, something like that. The amount of diversity we have in modern anteating specialists part of it helps the case because you can be an anteater in so many different ways. At the same time, it does, like I mentioned, you were like, oh, it was processing bone. And I was like, hyenas have an anteating member. But modern
Yep.
anteaters are so diverse that you can kind of almost do that with anything.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
you can almost say, oh, like a bear. Bears have an anteater.
Yes.
So it's a difficult thing to zero in on.
Yes. Well, and I also, the thought just occurred of, we mentioned this in the eusociality episode.
111.
Ants and termites are not the only eusocial insects. There are
Yes.
beetles. There are other members that have formed colonies. Were there others before ants took over in the Cretaceous that these might have been going after?
Right, exactly. Yeah, did you have eusocial beetle colonies in trees? And
Yes.
that's what they were doing, right? They were like woodpecker attacking trees with their claws.
Exactly.
And then going in there. There's all sorts of different ways that they could have been using.
The one thing I did not see mentioned anywhere is whether or not there's any evidence in like their hyoid or whatnot of what their tongue was doing. So we can only
Right.
hope they had big, long, silly tongues.
If we could find an Alvarez-Saur hyoid apparatus and get a sense of their tongues, that would very cool because we don't often see that. But the idea of finding a dinosaur with an anteater-like tongue is a very exciting possibility.
That'd be so cool. That'd be so cool.
Anchored at the back of the tail. Just the
yes,
whole
yes,
body
yes.
is tongue. It's powered by those caudofemoralis muscles.
This is why I had such long legs. It just would like flex and push the tongue out.
It would just like crouch down and then scrunch up the tongue.
What? I didn't mention it when we talked about the echidnas. I did see it noted that they keep their tongue stiff with blood flow when they put it into the nest so that it can push through. So like ant-eating tongues can be doing crazy stuff.
That's wild. That's so cool.
Yep.
That's very cool, and it also makes me want to make inappropriate jokes.
Yep.
Which I won't do because we're better than
family friendly. Well, now that we've talked about dinosaurs and have broken free of the shackles of talking about mammals.
Sure. Who appear to be the best at it among vertebrates.
Yes.
Like mammals certainly have like dominated that arena.
Absolutely. The most amount of them have done it compared to any other group of vertebrates.
Yes.
They are very good at it, but there are other ant specialists. Lizards are very good at eating ants.
Yeah.
Lizards are very good insectivores in general. They are good at eating insects. Most insect-eating lizards will often eat some ants. So like ants end up in the diets of lizards just all the time, left and right. There are not a ton of specialized ant-eating lizards, but they do show up. And I think one of the more interesting things is they are unique-looking lizards.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think if you looked at them, you would think, an ant-eating lizard.
Right. Because they don't look like mammal anteaters. Right? They're not long faces and long tongues and big claws and things like that.
The two most famous ant-eating lizard groups do actually look very similar to each other, but I don't know if it has anything to do with them eating ants.
That might be more habitat.
The thorny devil, the Australian mountain devil or thorny lizard.
Moloch.
And the horny toad lizards here in North America.
Which are phrynosematids.
These two lizards both are very similar in the fact that they are desert dwellers and very spiked.
Yes.
They're covered in spiky armor.
I think we used to have, maybe this was at the university, there was like a little model of a thorny devil, like a toy of a Moloch, a thorny devil, and it was difficult to hold.
Yes, yeah.
Because it's super spiky.
They're just covered in spikes. The thorny devil is one of the weirdest looking lizards to me because like not only are you covered in spikes, you've got this very rigid tail, that's like held up off the ground and is like blunt on the end, doesn't taper off. They've got the little false head backpack on their shoulders. That is this little lump with spikes off of it that is thought to be a false head to misdirect predators. They also have the very cool feature of that their scales can capillary action water, so that they just put their hand in some water, it will just flow up their body into their mouth and they can start drinking it.
Yep.
Very cool.
Oh, they're also the ones that shoot blood out of their eyes, aren't they?
The horny toad lizards do that.
Ah, okay. I'm so sorry. I've jumped ahead.
Yes. So yeah, they are both very weird, unique lizards, and they both eat almost nothing but ants.
Moloch is the genus for thorny devil, the Myrmecophagus organism that likes only chomping ants.
Yes, it is built for ant conquest.
That was a joke just for Will.
I am Moloch. Honestly, it looks weird enough. It looks.
Yes.
I would cast them. I would cast them.
I would cast Patton Oswalt to play a thorny devil.
Oh yes, there we go. There we go. They eat tons of ants, but they don't go after them the way a lot of the ant-eating mammals do, and potentially those dinosaurs did. They just lap them off the ground. So they'll find an area with ants and just blip, blip, one ant at a time, over and over. They can eat like hundreds. I saw it as one estimate of 750 ants per day. Just blip, 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 blip,
Yeah,
blip,
they'll
blip,
just
blip, blip.
station themselves near an ant colony
Mhm.
and just eat the ants as they go by.
And that's also how horny toads eat ants as well. They sit and just lap up an ant at a time, eating hundreds of ants. I saw it specifically said that their diets are up to like 94% ants,
Whew.
particularly harvester ants.
It's really interesting to note the difference in hunting method, and it makes all the sense in the world because one of the things that lizards, in particular as cold-blooded reptiles, are really good at is sitting in one place for a really long time.
Yes. Well, I also wonder how, because like we said, they're very similar in that they both are desert dwelling lizards with tons of horns and thorns over the body. Horny toad lizards are little fat, squat, short legged lizards, which is why they get called horny toad.
Mm-hmm.
They've got horns on the back of the head, which I saw noted are actual horns. They have horn cores.
Yeah, episode 140.
It's just, so cool. The rest of their horns are scales, but also they're desert dwellers, which means putting a lot of effort into getting your food is likely to make you overheat. So, how much of it is you're hunting this way because you're a lizard? How much is it because using the effort to dig into an ant colony would it be overexerting in the desert?
Mm-hmm.
Is hard to say. I didn't see many notes on like how they are specialized for eating ants. The one thing I saw noted was that in horny toad lizards, ants are very low in nutrition, so they need to eat a lot of them. And they notably have expanded stomachs to be able to load it up with more ants in one feeding.
Just a tummy full of ants.
Just full ants, just like a beanbag. Another thing I did find interesting with them was a paper talking about invasive Argentine ants. So Argentine ants are from South America. They've been introduced here into North America and they're one of the famous ones for creating super colonies and have taken over a lot of native ant territories. And evidently they are causing problems for these lizards because these are the wrong ants for them to be eating.
Yep.
They don't want to eat Argentine ants. They want to eat the species of ants they are adapted and used to eating. In the studies, it seemed that they would actively avoid eating Argentine ants, which is something that I don't know most people would suspect. Many anteaters are eating tons of species, but there are some that are specialized in certain species.
You'd think it would make sense to think that, any ant, just go after it.
Yeah, an ant's an ant.
An ant's an ant, but they're not. There's a lot of diversity in ants.
And so it does seem that the Argentine ants are messing up, not because they're like attacking the lizards, but they're driving off the good ants for them to eat. And they don't want to eat these ants. So they're having to eat ants they usually wouldn't or eat other non-ant insects. And it's messing up their habitats. So ant eating is not just a specialized in eating a kind of animal, but often certain species. While we're in herps, frogs and toads are also known to become ant specialists.
Sure.
I once again did not see many mentions of like physical adaptations to being better at eating ants, but I did see some mentions of like the gut microbiomes of some narrowmouth frogs and bufonids, true toads, have convergently evolved to help handle ants, specifically to tolerate and deal with toxic alkaloids, which are defensive mechanisms in ants and termites. And then famously, poison dart frogs from Central and South America, who are those brightly colored, very toxic frogs. Their skin is very toxic to the touch, get a bunch of their toxins from the ants, termites, and mites they eat, using those alkaloids as their own defense. And this is most notable by if you go to a zoo that has poison dart frogs, they are probably not that poisonous because they're not being fed ants. So there are other ant specialists, ant and termite eating specialists, other than mammals, that look very different than anteaters.
Yeah, this does again make a lot of sense that there
Mhm.
are a lot of different ways to target ants because there's just so many
Absolutely.
ants. If ants were like anteaters, there probably would only be one way to be an
Yes.
anteater eating specialist. But
Yes.
ants are preposterously diverse, and so there's different approaches to solving the problem of how do you get a belly full of ants.
The last group I wanted to talk about of ant and termite eating specialists are by far the most numerous and most common ant and termite eaters, which are ants.
Yep. Unsurprisingly, listen, you know thy enemy.
Yep. Yep. Ants are infamously good at eating other ant species and termites. There are many species of ant, tons of different kinds, that mostly only eat other species of ant or termite. These typically do not look particularly different than other ants, but they often do have very specific behaviors for combating and hunting this specific prey source. Most, or at least many, of the ant and termite specialist ants fall under the umbrella of army ants.
Mhm.
We talked about them back in the ants episode, which means wingless queens don't form a nest but make a bivouac, which is a structure of ants. These are very commonly known to hunt other ants and termites. And in this case, oftentimes one species may specialize in one other species.
Mhm.
So ants and termites are so numerous that you can be a species that only eats this food source and you can specialize in just one other kind of ant or termite. There are many ways they can go about this. Some just do the full army ant thing of they send scouts out, scouts track down a termite mound or termitary through usually scent, either smelling the galleries of the mound or the trails left by the termite workers. When they find it, they do not make contact. They return to the nest.
They do not engage.
They do not engage. They get reinforcements and come back with a raid of like 200 to 500 workers and just siege the termite mound. And it's just a full on battle. Workers stinging and killing termites, often caching them off to the side as the raid continues until they can get into the brood and get net eggs and larvae. And then they will carry the cached workers and brood and larvae back to the bivouac to feed upon. They have other tools they use to better hunt other ants and termites. Many of them use chemical mimicry. They will have similar chemicals in their exoskeleton that match their prey so that their scouts can approach workers without being noticed and potentially stealthily take them without anyone noticing an ant's nearby because no one can smell that they're different. Others use what's called propaganda chemicals. These are specific chemicals that trigger a panic response.
Mhm.
Danger, danger. And they will release these as they enter a nest. It freaks out the colony they're attacking and they abandon ship. They'll take many of the eggs and larvae, but they can't take everyone. So the invaders avoid combat,
Mhm.
raid what gets left behind. And this is useful because typically the queens of the raided colony are left alone. The workers that evacuated will come back with the brood they evacuated, and that colony can rebound and be raided on a later day.
So they basically pull the fire alarm and
Yes.
everybody leaves and they loot the place and
Yep.
then come back sometime after they've rebuilt.
Exactly. You also get a specific form of feeding off of termites called termitolesty, which is when they will nest close by or in the mounds of termites and then just discreetly rob eggs and larvae as they effectively siphon off the electricity and cable. These typically have small workers that will dig channels connecting their nest or their chambers to the chambers of the termites and then do little raiding robbing trips. These often use that chemical mimicry so they do not trigger any alarms as they just sneak around. A number of species are known to have long lasting repellent venoms which take effect on the host colony so that they can raid it undeterred. And at least one I saw has been noted to actually interact with termites and like touch antennae. And it's not known whether they prey on the termites or the brood, but they live in there. So they're living in a similar way to these other hunters, but they might be living in there. You also see basically all of these same behaviors in ant specialist ants. Termites comes up more often, but there are ones that use the alarm pheromones, that raid ant colonies, that live inside of or connect their nest to host ant colonies. So ants are by far the most common specialized predator of ants and termites that we see in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, and once again, going about it in a completely different way than mammals or reptiles.
Yes. There is a ton more that could be said, like the hunting techniques of ant and termite specialist army ants is so studied and so much that you could say I found multiple papers that are just like, here is a overview, and it's just all these different ways because many different species and many different groups of ants have convergently evolved a lot of different ways to feed on them. But at this point, we will wrap up our discussion.
Yeah, anteating. What my big takeaway from this episode is that specializing in eating ants is kind of like specializing in eating grass,
Yes.
and that just
Yep.
it's just everywhere,
Yep.
and dozens of different lineages have hit upon the survival strategy of if I can turn this into enough nutrition to live off. This isn't easy to eat, but if I can turn this into enough nutrition to live off of, I will. That's a successful evolutionary path, and it's just happened over and over again.
Yeah. I think grass is a great example because it's everywhere. There's a bunch of different kinds of it. There's a bunch of it. It does not want to be eaten.
Nope.
And it makes that abundantly clear.
And yet there are tons of specialized grazers. This really, this is a comment we have made over and over again on this podcast. It is difficult to overstate just how influential ants are as a phenomenon.
They're the grass of the animal kingdom, which is saying a lot.
The planet changed in the Cretaceous period for a lot of reasons, but
Yes.
one of those, like, ants showed up and everything was different after that innovation.
They are one of the few groups that showed up in the Cretaceous that, like them and birds, that are now
and flowers
ruling the planet better. Yeah, and flowers that are ruling the planet, that started there and went, this planet will be ours.
Yes, this will do nicely.
And just have stuck around and only gained more power over time. It's crazy.
I love this. This is one of those episodes where this is an episode that is about eating ants. And one of the biggest takeaways is how cool ants are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a credit to the ants themselves that so many things eat them.
Yes, that you are so successful that I might as well just eat you. Because it just makes sense. Very cool. If we did not get to your favorite ant eating example, let us know. Comment, share, go to the Discord. Before we wrap up the episode, though, we have one last section, which is our patron question. Every episode, we like to answer a question submitted by one of our patrons, which you can do if you sign up at certain levels. We have a couple of very fitting questions for this episode. David, what's our questions?
Today we have two questions about convergent evolution. The first is from Lucy, who asks, how can we tell it's convergent evolution when genes also converge? Which is an excellent question. And Ryan asks, how can we tell which traits are the convergent ones? For example, there are very theropod-like crocodilians, and we can tell that they're not theropods because of things like the ankles, but how do we know that it isn't a theropod that convergently evolved croc-like ankles? How do we know which features are the convergent ones and which ones are the not convergent ones? These are both excellent questions, very
So good.
fitting for this episode, and really crucial parts of understanding evolutionary history.
Absolutely. And as we saw in this episode, there isn't always a guaranteed way to confirm either of these scenarios if you don't have enough information. If we
Yes.
have a situation of convergence, like, Eurotomandua, where we've only got one fossil, we've only got one member, it can be often quite tricky to confirm these difficulties if you do not have enough info.
Yes. The short answer, because it's a patron question, but I think the
Mhm.
short answer is that basically every feature of an organism's body or genetics or everything comes from its ancestry.
Yes.
And only so many things are going to be convergent. And there are some things that can't be convergent very easily.
Yes.
So you could have, to use Ryan's example, a dinosaur that evolved croc-like feet and ankles, but it is almost certainly still going to have dinosaur-like features in the skull, dinosaur-like teeth, dinosaur-like pelvis. Basically every part of the anatomy is dinosaur. Some of them have shifted. And some of those things are just anatomical shapes that
Yes.
can be easily adjusted, but others are like, no, this like channel, this nerve passage through this bone is distinctive to this group, and it is a very difficult thing to evolve away from. Or like tooth anatomy, where it's like, this group, their teeth are made of this tissue, and you can change the shape of the tooth all you want, but the actual chemical structure of it is going to tell you what group it actually belongs to.
And if we run into a situation where we are having difficulty, this is a very convergent species, maybe we only have that specimen, maybe we don't have a lot of it, maybe we have enough to see the convergent parts, but we're missing the skull, we're missing what we would hopefully look for some of these identifying parts. There are situations where you might have to kind of just pause and wait until you find more fossils, find more relatives, because that's another thing that can happen. This species looks almost exactly like this other group, but the species before it very much is clearly not of that group.
Yes.
But has enough in common with the one we're looking at that they're definitely related. So now I've got solid evidence that you're just a weirdo. You are from this other group. That, Eurotomando, again, once we got a closer look, it went, the more we look at this and the better we understand things like the pangolin group, the more and more it's looking like it should go there versus the anteaters. So you definitely can have, and if you look up articles and like Wikipedias about famous convergent members, you'll see it was originally put with this group. Then it was put with this group. And then as we learn more about genetics and as we got more specimens, now we pretty much agree it's actually over here. So it might take a while, it might bounce around, but you just keep checking in, keep comparing, looking for as many lines of evidence as you can in the body, in its relatives, etc.
Yeah, and this also goes with genes. Lucy makes the very good point that you can get convergent genetic evolution. The same genetic changes can happen in multiple different lineages. But again, if you can sample most of the genome or even a major portion of the genome, your genes are, generally speaking, still going to line up mostly with that organism's actual close relatives.
Even if you've gotten like similar mutations or similar adaptations, you were working with a different base set.
Yes, your starting point was different.
Yeah.
And that's always going to have an influence. So it really does kind of come down to a numbers and probabilities game, right? That's what phylogeny is. When we run a phylogenetic analysis, it's computer. Here's 300 features of each of these organisms. compare them and find the most similarities, that's where we're finding our close relationships. In theory, it is certainly possible that some lineage could happen to evolve almost every aspect of its genetics or anatomy to be convergent with another, but it is not very likely, and we should still be able to find evidence of where it came from to contrast where it is in the state that we see it.
Yes, it is based on our current understanding of evolution, statistically, basically a non-chance that something would evolve so similarly to another member of another lineage that it is indiscernible genetically and physically.
Yes. It makes me think of like the first thought that came to mind. This could be for any technology, but it made me think of like cars, where if you challenged like 3 different countries to make the exact same car, but then
Yes.
you showed it to a car expert, they'd be like,
Mhm.
this one was made by the Germans and this one is a Japanese model because these techniques were used. The car is the
Well, and,
same
like,
shape and it does the same thing, but like this type of technique or this type of material is what that culture uses.
well, and I'd like step off of that in a very real world example of forgeries, like forgeries of art.
Yes.
The way we determine it's a forgery is we go in and go, yeah, it's the paint's made out of the wrong stuff.
Yes.
It looks identical visibly. Chemically, it's wrong. Or even if you were to paint it the exact same way with the exact same techniques as the Grand Masters, which at that point, why make forgeries? Just sell your paintings. But
right. Just be an artist. You're talented. It's the talent's within you.
you're good. Even if you were to recreate everything, there would still be things of like, well, yeah, but the carbon dating of the canvas, like this canvas isn't old enough. The aging, the paint has aged. And even if you artificially age it, it's different. Like there's gonna be difference. It's if we were building the same thing, I could weld mine, but you could bolt yours. And that's going to show when you take a close enough look.
And this comes back down to the way that my favorite way to describe evolutionary outcomes, which is that the features of any given organism are the result of how it has adapted to its environment and lifestyle and its ancestry.
Yes.
And both of those are going to be evident as long as we have enough information, and both of them are going to have an influence on how that organism got to where it is. And once we have enough data, we can read both influences.
Well, and sometimes, like we mentioned, you may get just a thing where I don't have anything physically to determine that something's wrong, but you're in China.
Right. Well, Eurotamandua.
Yes.
You're in Europe. I think that's from the Mesozoic.
That's not where anteaters are.
No, Eocene Europe is not the right place for an anteater to be.
So either we have fully misunderstood the fossil record of Xenarthrans and have just a fundamental lack of knowledge on what actually was going on, or we're mistaken on you.
Yes. Or this just isn't an anteater. So yes, these are excellent questions. Lucy and Ryan, thank you so much, because this is such a great episode to bring that up in.
It's so good. Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening. If you want more info about ant eating and anteaters, check out the blog. There'll be links, there'll be pictures. This one's a great one for pictures because it's a bunch of cool looking weird animals.
Yeah.
Remember, as we mentioned, we are toward the end of Spooky. All of our episodes have come out, so you can check those out. We've got QT and the live stream coming up next month. Also, at next month on November 1st, we've got the Q&A questionnaire coming out for the end of the year Q&A. So keep your eyes out for all of those. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Thank you to everyone who requested these topics. Thank you to our new patrons, and tippy top thanks to our top tier patrons, Sarah May, Daniel the Bug Lover, Jeff Ellington, and Bogdraw.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, for contributing, and for your support.
Yes. I don't got anything else to say about ant eating.
I know that you can get like chocolate covered ants.
Yes.
And you can get like ants and lollipops and stuff. And I don't think I've ever actually had ants. but it seems like the way to go.
I've always wanted to try one of the honeypot ants.
Oh yeah.
The ones that store nectar and stuff in I can't remember, there's a name for those ants. The ones that swell their abdomen and hang from the ceiling. They have a name.
Yeah.
And they are famously known to have been eaten by people because they just are like little gushers.
If you, dear listeners, are yourself Myrmecophagus, tell us about your experience. What do you find is the best? How long is your tongue?
Man, surely most of us have been accidentally Myrmecophagus at some point in our lives. Like, have you eaten a pignet? You probably partook.
I have knowingly eaten more bugs on accident than I have knowingly intentionally eaten, and I have intentionally eaten some bugs.
Yes,
and just the thought of how many bugs I have accidentally and unknowingly eaten is, I mean, yeah. When you have just built yourself into the fabric of the world, that's what. Yeah, you're just gonna get eaten sometimes.
Yes, it's gonna happen, and evidently, it's a good idea, so it's fine. We release episodes every fortnight. Bye till then.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.